Well, when we spoke to Joe Price on our interview with him about a month ago with the Baseball Reliquary, the California-based Alt Hall of Fame and Museum, after the cameras stopped rolling, we asked, hey, what other stories would you want told on a podcast? And he immediately told the story of Ralph Carhart and the Hall Ball. And immediately I was so fascinated after hearing it, I went out, I got the book, and reached out to Ralph. And we are excited to have Ralph Carhart today. Ralph is a baseball historian. He is contributor to 4 volumes on player biographies for the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR. And he's the author of the book that I really enjoyed, The Hall Ball, One Fan's Journey to Unite Cooperstown's Immortals with a Single Baseball. Ralph, thanks so much for coming on today.
I am thrilled to be here, Jerry. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ralph, before we start, we ask all our guests, new guests, how did baseball find you? How'd you get into baseball as a kid or adult? Favorite team growing up?
So my baseball story is this. I was a Yankee fan growing up because my dad was a Yankee fan. He coached my little league team. And that was sort of how I fell for the game. Things changed around 1984. 2 things happened simultaneously. He hit puberty and had to reject everything my father stood for. And the Mets got good. So I became a Mets fan around 84, 85. Got to enjoy the championship in 86. Thought it would be like that every year. Still waiting. I fell out of love with baseball around 1994. I had just graduated from college. I was looking for work in the industry that I work in theater, and I was really focused on that. While that was happening, the strike occurred, which sort of soured me and a whole lot of baseball fans against baseball at that time. So I didn't actually pay any attention to baseball for about 5 or 6 years. 1994 to about 1999. Then in 99, I moved to New York City. I got a job working for the Calvin Klein Company at their world headquarters. And the person who runs the company, which is not Calvin Klein, it's a gentleman by the name of Barry Schwartz, had a box at Yankee Stadium that when he did not use it, he let his employees have the tickets. And one night his secretary called my office and said, we got these tickets. Do you want them? I had never been to Yankee Stadium as a kid, even when I was a Yankee fan. I grew up upstate. My parents weren't the sort of people who made that drive down to New York City. I'd gone to Shea Stadium a couple of times after, once I became a Mets fan and I got a little older, I came down with friends. I decided I would take Mr. Schwartz's tickets and go to Yankee Stadium and check it out because I'd never seen it. And by the time I left there that night, like every nostalgic memory for how amazing the sport is kind of just smacked me in the face all at once. And there was no turning back from there. From that moment in 1999, I've just sort of charged ahead, trying to absorb as much baseball as I possibly could.
And you forgave them for the strike.
I did. Well, it helped that the year before you had Ripken breaking the streak, which was a huge sort of balm to help the baseball fans feel a little bit better about the whole thing. Then, of course, for better or for worse, we had the McGuire and Sosa home run battle. Baseball, there was a lot that happened in a very short period of time, right when I was open and available to it, that it brought me back in.
Fantastic. I just love hearing those stories. Now, before we get into the specific details, give us just an overview of what the Hall Ball Project was.
The Hall Ball Project. The Hall Ball Project was a combination of 2 things that I really love to do. And one is anything baseball. And the other one is visiting cemeteries. And I know that sounds weird. Amongst my other little hobbies, I'm a genealogist, and it came from sort of studying my family's background in the family tree and doing that research, which any genealogist will tell you means you end up in a cemetery quite often. That's where that research is done, right? And I just fell in love with them. They're, especially... I was living in New York City at the time. I'm in central Jersey now, but I was living in New York City at the time. And yes, New York City has parks, right? And there's Central Park. There's lots of parks. New York City gives these opportunities for its denizens to get away from the city aspect of life. But there was something really special about the big historic cemeteries, Greenwood and Calvary, the ones that we've got here in the city. They were designed to be parks, right? Greenwood in particular was supposed to be an urban park. People would go to Greenwood on Sundays and have a picnic with their kids, and while they played around the tombstones, that was its intention. And I found that unlike the parks that are actual parks in New York City, there was this quiet that is something I truly appreciate. I'm a person who likes quiet, which is challenging when you live in New York City. But if you're standing in the middle of Greenwood in Brooklyn, that's a place in the five boroughs where you can actually find it. And so it became very appealing to me just to spend time in a cemetery. And the idea was kind of born from that, specifically because my wife at the time, Anna, and I, we were in Cooperstown. We were there for an event. They do this really fun thing during the All-Star game at the Hall of Fame. They show the game in one of the theaters, and they do trivia in between innings and give out free food, and it's a real fun thing. And we were there for that, but we were early. So because we had been doing all this genealogical research and spending all this time in cemeteries, we decided to hit one of the cemeteries in Cooperstown. And while we were there, Anna found a tombstone for Abner Doubleday. Now, it's not our Abner Doubleday. He's actually buried in Arlington. It's Abner. It was Abner's grandfather. But that sort of seeing that name written in stone is sort of the thing that got the wheels turning as to the idea of what would it take to visit all of the graves of the members of the Hall of Fame. And that was sort of the genesis of the idea. It grew from there. It became more than that as the idea started to, simmer in my mind. But that was really the start of it all, was seeing Abner Doubleday's name written in stone in Cooperstown.
And you said in the book you were a little terrified of graveyards as a kid, though.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, all kids have that terror. And I had, I had a large family. And, one of the unfortunate side effects of having a large family is you go to a lot of funerals, right? So I spent a lot of time in cemeteries that most little kids didn't, right? So I over time ended up building up like this kind of a fear of them that once I was an adult and, I wasn't afraid of ghosts or anything anymore, that it went away and was replaced by my appreciation for quiet.
There's a little known fact about me that I actually used to work in a cemetery.
Oh, yeah? What'd you do? Did you work in the office?
I worked in the office. Yeah. Yep, I did. It was a Jewish cemetery, so that is a different level of respect for the grave sites than some other cemeteries.
It was interesting. One of the things that I wasn't really thinking about when I started the project and I discovered along the path is how each one of those cemeteries has its own identity, has its own personality, and how much the front office staff shapes that, right? Like their attitude towards the work they do is really, it reflects in sort of how the cemetery presents itself to the public. Yeah. There were times in which the cemetery workers were extraordinarily helpful to me in the project, and there were other times when it wasn't like they were trying to get in my way, but they didn't really care. I wasn't family, right? Like that's the big thing. When you walk into a cemetery and you say, I'm not family, but I'm trying to find this thing, they look at you funny. The one that was the hardest was Don Drysdale. Drysdale was not buried. He was cremated. And I chose for the folks who were cremated for the project rather than visiting their grave, which is, we haven't gotten to this part of the story yet, but ultimately I decided to go and visit all the graves, right? And for the folks who didn't have graves because they were cremated, or like in the case of Roberto Clemente, their body was lost at sea, I created a symbolic picture and had that picture as the stand-in for the purposes of my project, which involved taking a photograph of each one of the graves. And the symbolic picture I took of Don Drysdale was a columbarium. It's a place where they put ashes at a cemetery in Los Angeles, and you were really only allowed into that building if you were a relative. And so I lied and said that I was a nephew of Don Drysdale so that I could get in there and get that picture. The funny thing is he's not even there anymore. His ashes were in there for a few years, And then his family came and took them away, and I don't know where they ended up. But that was the spot I picked for him. So there were a few times.
How dare you keep me, Ralph Drysdale, out of my family.
out of visiting my uncle, my favorite uncle of all time. Yeah, there was a little light criming that occasionally went on over the course of this project. A few cemeteries that, were supposed to close at sunset, but I was only in town for the day and needed the picture, so, I kind of went over the fence, a few of those. Rogers Hornsby was a particularly one where you literally had to get up and move a fence that said no trespassing to get to his grave. So
No. Oh, no. So I'll ask you a question with that. Did you always have a shovel with you?
No. I almost never.
No, I don't mean
had
to dig anything up. No, I don't mean that. Just some of the tombstones I noticed were covered.
Oh yeah.
In dirt and
there
stuff,
was.
and you
I
had to
definitely
uncover 'em.
had.
Gosh, I would think that I
Yeah.
wasn't going the other way.
I kept brushes and things in the car. I tried to limit them, though. I learned a lot over the course of the project about what it is to maintain and restore gravestones. And, you can't just, if you're trying to clean a gravestone, you can't just walk up with a brush and scrape at it, right? You're ultimately going to wear it away. There's very specific cleaning techniques. So I tried to minimize when I actually made physical contact with one of the stones, but sometimes over time or whatever, the weeds had grown over it, there was dirt on it, and I had to kind of clear it out just so you could see the name.
So you decide to visit all the grave sites here of Hall of Famers, but not just visit them.
Right.
You decide to take a picture.
Right. So I got home from, having this inspiration in Cooperstown and started to do a little research. And I had discovered that this idea that I had of visiting all of the Hall of Famers was not unique. There were plenty of other guys who'd done it. One person in particular, a gentleman by the name of Stu Thornley, who had a whole website dedicated to it. And so when I discovered that, there was, it was helpful because it meant that the research to find all of these guys was going to be pretty easy because someone had already done. But it also meant that what I was creating was not unique, which is, as an artist, as a, playwright and a writer, I'm more than fine with having my work be an homage or have a reference to, but I always need for it to be unique in some way. I need it to be mine. And so I needed to come up with some way to make this idea mine, since other people had already done the initial idea. And the idea that I came up with was that on that same trip to Cooperstown, Anna had spotted in Cooperstown, there's a little ballpark called Doubleday Field. It was a WPA project. We can thank President Roosevelt for its existence. And running next to it is a little creek. And sometimes when the teams in there hit a foul ball, the ball will go in the creek. And Anna had spotted that there was a ball in the creek, and she went down and got it. And I decided that what I was going to do to make my project unique was to take that baseball, which had this Cooperstown pedigree in my mind. Although, funny enough, if you look at it, it's not a Major League Baseball. It's like a baseball that they use for like American Legion in college games. But I decided that it had this Cooperstown pedigree, and what I was going to do is I was going to take it around to all of the graves, and I was going to photograph that baseball at all of the graves, so that when I was done, I had a single baseball that had visited all of the deceased Hall of Famers. And that, of course, then led to the next step where I said to myself, well, why stop with the dead ones? Why not try to get the ball photographed with the living guys as well? And that was ultimately what the project became, an attempt to photograph this one baseball with every member of the Hall of Fame, living or deceased.
Now, at that point, I think let's see, by 2018, I guess because this was an 8-year project, right?
Yeah, about 8.5 years. I started in 2010 and I essentially finished during induction weekend of 2018. There was one more little
and I think you say in your
side trip that came about, but the bulk of it was done by Hall of Fame inauguration 2018.
So an immense project. I think you say in your book at that point, there were 323 Hall members.
Mm-hmm.
That
Correct.
includes players and pioneers and managers and umpires.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what, like 77 live?
Yeah, I think in the end I
live
photographed 7, maybe it was about 80 of them living. There's always somewhere between 70 and 80 living Hall of Famers at any one point in time. And it was somewhere around 77, 78, somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
How quickly did the genesis of the idea to get living members in the project? Was that pretty quick, or?
I would say that by the time I had finished my first real cemetery tour, the whole thing began. I say in the book how one of the reasons why the project actually happened was because I lived in New York City. And there were a lot of Hall of Famers that were buried in the New York City area. If I had been, if I lived in North Dakota where there are 0 Hall of Famers buried, I probably never would have done this project, right? But I lived in New York City, and that gave me a huge head start. So probably by the time I finished the New York City tour of the folks who were buried here, I had the idea to include the living guys. It was relatively early that I had the idea to include them. What I didn't know was how I was going to do that. I had no idea how to access these guys, but I was going to give it a shot.
So how did you access them?
I started looking through the newspaper online, to see when baseball card shows would be happening, and they would have guests who would be making Hall of Famers who'd be making appearances. I'd been to a baseball show since I was a little kid. I used to go when I was a kid, but I hadn't been in a long, long time. And I went to one. There was going to be a couple of guys there. No, that wasn't even how I started. I'll tell you how I started in a second. How I got the bulk of them were the baseball card shows. I met the promoters for the baseball card shows. I told them about the project. A lot of the photos of the living guys came from the baseball card shows. The promoters kind of let me go backstage after the signings period was over and get my photos that way. The first photos actually came about because I was a year in, and I was going to induction weekend specifically to go into the Hall of Fame, to tell them about the project, to tell them that the ultimate goal of the project, and I haven't mentioned this to your listeners yet, but the ultimate goal of the project was to, when I was done with the ball, donate it to the Hall of Fame and have it become a part of their collection. So I told the Hall of Fame about what the project was, and I tried to see if they would help me get access to the living guys. I figured, since this was a thing they were going to end up with, they would be keen to sort of help me make it happen. But I was very wrong. Right. The Hall of Fame doesn't really do anything to help fans connect with players, not in an individual way like that, right? Like the Hall of Fame will schedule events and stuff with Hall of Famers, and you can buy a ticket. But making those one-on-one connections, it's not really a thing the Hall of Fame does. And I understand why. There was a period of time where the Hall of Fame was a little loose about respecting the space and the private time of the members of the Hall. And the regime that took over after that sort of changed the mindset and started respecting the players' privacy and their space in a way that hadn't before. And the end result of that was that you suddenly saw a lot more of the players showing up at induction weekend. Prior to that, a lot of them wouldn't come because they didn't want to show up in town and be molested all weekend. But once the Hall of Fame started providing them ways to maintain their privacy while they were there, you saw an increase in the number of players who showed up, which was good for them, right? That was the whole point. But I asked the Hall if they would help me, and they said no.
Yeah, but it is good for them. But the woman, good for you.
Yeah. But the woman said, but this is induction weekend. Just go outside and you'll see somebody. And I stepped out of the Hall of Fame, and literally right across the street, sitting at a table signing autographs, was Yogi Berra. And so I went over to Yogi and I got my first photograph of a living guy, and it went off from there.
Now, this often isn't free these days.
Yes.
So I know
taking a photograph will
for
often
some of them you had to make
money.
donations
Yeah.
or...
Yogi was the best, honestly, because
You said you realized he was.
Yeah, Yogi was the best because the way he did it was he had a little can out in front of him that was a donation can that he was going to give the money away to some local baseball program. It didn't really matter. He wasn't doing it for the money. So I stuck $5 in the can and I took my photo. But a lot of the pictures I did get for free because of those connections with the show promoters. They made it happen. There were a small handful that I did ultimately have to pay for because the player absolutely refused to let me take his picture without paying for it. So there were a couple of those, but I would say 95% of the photographs of the living guys were free. The only thing I spent was a lot of time. There was it involved a lot of patience of sitting around and waiting for them to be ready for me, right? Like they were there to do a job. They were signing autographs. They were meeting and greeting people who did pay for the privilege. So I was last. I had to kind of just sit and wait for them to be done with everything else, and then I got my turn. But the majority of the photographs were free. They did not cost me anything.
I noticed a lot of the players in the book have very similar faces of like,
yes,
it's like I'm smiling. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but I'm smiling.
There's it's a combo for them, right? Part of it is that they've got a bit. They've got a routine, especially guys who, were elected to the Hall of Fame 30 years ago. There's a thing they do with fans, and it's just comfortable for them, right? But I did occasionally get a little pushback only because what I was asking for was not something that anyone else had asked for. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that I did not want the players to autograph the ball. I didn't actually want any autographs on the ball. Part of the point of the project was to unite all of the members of the Hall of Fame, and autographs would separate them because I wouldn't be able to get the autographs of the 200 and, whatever it was, 30 guys who were deceased, right? And I didn't want that. I didn't want that differentiation. I wanted the ball to sort of have the same energy for each of them. So I wasn't asking for autographs, which is not something that ball players are used to. They're used to someone sticking in a ball in their face and asking them to sign it. And I put a ball in their face and said, no, I just want to take your picture of you holding it, right? So for some of them, it was an odd experience. They didn't know what to make of me.
Well, it seems like there's a gimmick. Like, what's this guy's gimmick? I think I like Jack Morris had the comment after you left. What the hell was that?
What the hell was that? Right. Yeah.
And Don Sutton thought you were a squirrel. Don Sutton
thought I was crazy. He thought I was crazy.
I think you're a squirrel.
Yeah. He wanted to do a competency exam before he'd let me take the picture. He had to ask me a bunch of questions to make sure I wasn't dangerous.
That's funny. I think one thing a lot of the photos had in common were coffee pots in the background.
Yeah. There was a lot of that. The back room of those baseball card shows usually smells like coffee.
Well, I'm going to ask you a few questions here.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned your first signature, Yogi. Some of your favorites?
First photograph, no signature.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's right. First photograph. Some favorite moments?
Ernie Banks was a favorite. Most of the exchanges took like less than 30 seconds. I did the wrap. I told the ball players what I was doing and what the project was. And, they either said, okay, sure, and let me take the picture, or they didn't, and then I had to find another way, right? But the whole thing usually took between 30 and 60 seconds. Ernie Banks kept me in the room for about 15 minutes chatting with me about baseball. And, to spend 15 minutes of your life talking to Ernie Banks about baseball, that made the whole thing worth it. Yeah, Ernie was a great one. Ernie was a really great one.
Lou Brock also spent some time
Lou Brock
with you, right?
spent a lot of time with me, although his reason was different. Lou Brock wanted to make sure his hair looked good. I had to, most of the guys I snapped off like 3 or 4 quick photographs and moved on. I have probably like 20 pictures of Lou Brock because he didn't like the way his hair looked. He was having a bad hair day, so he made me keep taking different pictures till he liked his hair.
Any really nice experiences? It seemed to me from reading your book that sometimes the personality of the player that you can imagine on the field came out in some of your descriptions. And so there were nice ones and there were some crusty ones.
Yeah, there were definitely some crusty ones. It depended, I guess, on how I was feeling on any given day. Because there were some times when the crusty guys made me just laugh and be like, oh, that's just Reggie Jackson being Reggie Jackson, right? And then sometimes they were, I walked away going, wow, Johnny Bench is really a bit of a jerk. Like, it really depended.
You have to specify more. So first of all, Reggie took an initial photo with you.
He did, and he held the ball in a way in which his middle finger was pointed directly at me. And I loved that photograph. I wanted that photograph so bad. I would have done anything for that photograph to be in the book. His manager took my phone away and made me delete it, and I had to take another photograph. So that was Reggie, who, that one was fun. Johnny Bench was just in a surly mood that morning. I don't know what it was, but I did my pitch. I explained to him, what the project was and what I was trying to do. And he looked at me and he said, "So you're that kind of asshole then?" And I had no idea what else to say. So I said, "Yes, Mr. Bench, I am that kind of asshole. Can I have the photograph?" Which he did. He took the picture, so I took it.
Have any of since then said they read your book, or did you send them your book?
No, I haven't sent one to anybody, and none of them have mentioned that they've read it. It's interesting. There was one, who was it? I'm blanking now. I did bump into one. I spent a couple of years after the book came out going to induction weekend and trying to sell it at the tables there on Main Street. And one of them came by and saw the book at one point. I think it was Sandberg. It might have been Ryan Sandberg, and made a comment about it. But no one has reached out to me outside of that.
Well, this podcast, I'm sure
I know they're all listening to this, so I'm going to get 230 phone calls as soon as this.
It's going to be amazing, amazing.
You are. You're going to get the new Hall of Famers reaching out.
That's right.
Can I take a picture?
I stopped in 2018. There's 8 years worth of guys now, right?
I am sure Derek Jeter, knowing his personality, will reach out to you.
I have to be honest, super grateful to be done before Jeter got elected, because I knew that was a photograph I was never going to be able to get. So
you'd have to stand in the crowd and sort of hold your ball up with him on the stage.
I
in
did
the background.
that. So one of the people, there were 5 guys I didn't get a photograph of holding the ball, and one of them was Tom Seaver. I did go to an event that Tom Seaver was at, and I tried to get him holding the ball, but it was all very rushed, and he went by too quickly, and he didn't. So that's what I have, is actually a picture of me holding the ball as Tom Seaver walked by. I didn't include that one in the book. I didn't think it counted.
Who were the others? Ken Griffey, right?
The other ones I did not get were Seaver, Griffey, Koufax, Mays, and McCovey.
Were they just hard to get to?
Yeah, they were just hard to get to. They were, they didn't do public appearances. Griffey had, he wasn't even elected until, I was almost halfway done with the project. So I had a shorter time span with him. The other guys just, Koufax doesn't do baseball card shows. Willie Mays used to do one a year in San Francisco, but, it wasn't like I could get out there to do that. They were just guys who did not make public appearances in the way that the other players did. And I tried reaching out to them. I wrote letters and stuff, and the Nancy Seaver, Tom's wife, wrote me back after I wrote them. And she said, "Your project sounds very interesting, but I need you to know that Tom is getting sick and is not really doing public things anymore, so you're never going to get this photograph from him." And in fact, I didn't. And it was really Tom Seaver that sort of inspired me to wrap the project up, right? Because the Hall of Fame elects new members every year, and so this project could go on ad infinitum. But I didn't want it to. Frankly, I got tired of sitting around waiting for baseball players to be available for me to take their photograph. I wanted it to be done. I decided in 2018, by that point I had gotten all of the deceased players, and I had decided that I was just going to give it one more shot to try and get the living guys. And it was, it was Tom Seaver's death. It was understanding that, for guys like Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and Sandy Koufax, I'm considerably younger than them. I could simply just wait it out and get the photograph of them on the other end instead of this end, right? But when it reached that point in the process, that was when it stopped feeling like this respectful thing that I was doing and started to feel ghoulish, like I was just waiting for these guys to die. And I didn't want that. So I decided 2018 was it. I was going to get whatever I could from the new class from that year, and I was calling the project done. And I don't regret it. I don't look back. I've had lots of really great vacations in the last 8 years that weren't centered around cemeteries. So It's a nice change of pace.
I can't even imagine a nice vacation.
Yeah, you got to go to Hawaii. So
I did.
You know.
I did. There was Alexander Cartwright's buried in Hawaii, and so
that's right.
I saved him for almost last, so that I could have that big trip be like a. Did you stop and see?
Did you stop to see Charles Lindbergh's non-baseball grave there, too?
I did not.
Yeah, you had mentioned some people passed away during this process, specifically like Ralph Kiner, who as a Mets fan, him a longstanding broadcaster, really moved you.
Yeah, it was, especially, the ones that I did get to photograph before they passed. It became a really powerful experience, right? To realize I had a moment with these legends before they left the world. So
now I won't ask you who the meanest was, but let's say crustiest. I know 2 people refused once or twice, and then you finally got them.
Yeah, the crustiest was actually Jim Bunning.
Jim Bunning?
Jim Bunning, yeah. He was very rude.
Yeah.
Even ruder than Bench, right? Yeah, he was pretty cold and pretty harsh.
For joining
Thank you for having me. It was really great being here. I really enjoyed talking with you all.
We probably could have chatted another hour with Ralph, but sadly he had to go. I did want to wrap things up a little bit, finish his story. I love the story in the book. Go read it, check it out. Often the players' personalities especially echo their reaction to Ralph. Randy Johnson and Bob Gibson, for example, 2 of the most intimidating pitchers of all time, actually turned Ralph down for the picture on the first ask. But happily, Ralph was persistent, got the picture after all. Good job. I did want to wrap it up by mentioning what happened to the ball after this tremendous 8-year endeavor. Initially, Ralph mentioned he had hoped to donate it to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown with his photos so they could do an exhibit, perhaps a kiosk, and people could pull them up and, see these wonderful pics. But the Hall declined his donation, and Ralph was understandably saddened by this, but he had assumed from some correspondence at the beginning of his journey that the Hall would accept it. Happily, enter the Baseball Reliquary Museum in Whittier, California, that we've discussed on a past episode. They were more than happy to accept the Hall ball in their collection, and the ball found a home. That's our show today. Coming up next Monday, we debate a ranking of the top 10 Major League Baseball catchers of all time. That's not pretty good, I think. I want to thank Ralph so much for being on the show today. I loved his book, and his interview meant a lot to me. Thanks always to Brooke, my producer. And shout out especially to our daughter Morgan, who's been keeping up, and surely she'd be listening. And we're always happy you're listening. Hope you'll keep listening. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, where you can watch our videos. And or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Heading back to the locker room, this is Jerry Dines and Fungos and Fastballs.